Friends, welcome to our Good Friday reflection, a time when we set apart to remember the darkest of days that brought the greatest of hope. We're thinking about the crucifixion of our Lord Jesus Christ. We're thinking about the end of his life as he knew it, his earthly ministry coming to an end. We're thinking about all the confusion. We're thinking about all the doubts, about all the failures that surrounded these last 6 hours of Jesus' life here on earth. 6 hours one Friday, 6 hours that changed everything, that the whole world would be changed because of what happened outside Jerusalem on a hill called Golgotha. Golgotha wasn't some cathedral with candles and priests or ministers in great robes, beautifully spun or sewn. Golgotha was a city dump. Golgotha was a place where people took their rubbish and threw it away. And it was on this hill, this Mount of Crucifixion, that Jesus was publicly taken, crucified, and hung for the whole world to see, that this was an end to this man's ministry, an end to the influence that he had shown and given to so many people in their lives over 3 years. He walked, he was all over Israel, he was up and down the land, speaking about a different kind of kingdom, speaking about something that was dynamic and new, that was directly from his Father in heaven. It wasn't about restoring borders or setting apart people as being extra special. It was a message for the whole world, and it still is a message for the whole world. Underpinning everything that we do on Good Friday is the fact that God loved the world so much that what was happening on Golgotha's hill was part of his great love story for all of humanity. And that includes you and me. That includes those who have never been inside a church. That includes those who have rejected the church. But yet within each of us, there is that stirring, isn't there? There is that desire to know a deeper connection in our lives. And that connection is that we were made for God. And deep within each of us is that longing to get back, that longing to understand again, or for the first time, where we truly fit in, our identity, our being, the sleepless nights in the middle of isolation and a virus, and all the issues that are surrounding our world at this time, or maybe just your world on its own. Or maybe it's just the small questions. But in all of this, what Christians believe is that the answers come and flow from these 6 hours that happened 2,000 years ago. You know, building up to this, we had Palm Sunday, we had a great celebration. People welcomed Jesus as a king, the King of Israel who had come back to rid them of the Romans. But Jesus never came riding on a great charger, but came on a donkey, the symbol of peace. And in those last days, in the build-up to Passover, to the great Jewish celebration where they remember what God had done for them in rescuing them from Egypt, in the build-up to that, he taught, he spoke, he shared his final words with them. And then after the Passover, which became our communion, our sharing of bread together, Jesus went to the Garden of Gethsemane. And there he agonized as he prayed, as he realized what his Father was asking him to do, which was to lay down his life for his friends and for the whole world. One of the great symbols around the world is the Red Cross. You know, wherever you are in the world, if you see that Red Cross, it's a place of healing. It's a place where you can get help. And of course, the Red Cross is based upon the cross of Jesus Christ. Many years ago, it was written about Jesus, 700 years before he came, that through everything that he would do, by his wounds, we would find healing. Healing physically perhaps, but definitely spiritually within the broken lives that we all have. And to know that deep peace which we all long for. Just as Jesus was rising from prayer, they came and they took him. And then the story takes such a turn of darkness. The light of the world is dimmed in these moments. The light of the world came into contact with the deepest of darkness. It was chaos for his friends. One had betrayed them, and the rest had scattered. He went through a kangaroo trial court where he was found guilty, where witnesses were brought that made up trumped up lies. And yet there was one thing that Jesus said that was true through all of this, is that symbolically it would be 3 days that the temple would be rebuilt. The temple, not just that great building in Jerusalem, but the temple being his body. That in 3 days it would be built again. It would be raised again to life. No one understood what he meant at that point, because in the chaos and the fear, in the darkness, people scattered. And you know, there's one part of the story that haunts me. It's the part that after Jesus predicted that Peter would betray him 3 times. And then after he did this and the cock crowed, Jesus and Peter, their eyes met. The piercing eyes of love met the piercing eyes of rejection and failure. Now, I know what failure is in my life, and maybe you do. And maybe we think that we're beyond God's reach or grace because we have failed him so deeply. Friends, Good Friday is the day of hope. Think of Peter. Think of who he was. The big loudmouth fisherman who would do anything, say anything, a man of action. And yet when Jesus needed him most, he fell. He not only denied that he knew him, he denied that he had ever known him. He rejected everything that Jesus had given to him. And he must have felt beyond the point of brokenness. And we all know at times in our lives that sense of rejection, that sense of doing things that are so deeply wrong. Is there a door from failure, from our sin, from doing the wrong things? Peter would learn that story, but he would go through the agony of the cross from afar as he watched the one whom he had given up everything to follow die in his place. And from that kangaroo trial, Jesus, after a scourging, a severe beating with all sorts of cruel Roman torture implements, weakened and bloodied, he walked through the streets of Jerusalem. He walked and he fell. The cross was so heavy. He was so weak. The crowds were jeering. Some were probably laughing. Others were weeping. And in these moments, in these seconds and minutes that were running out as the blood ran from his body, our Father in heaven was looking over all of this, shuddering with the tears rolling down his face, and yet knowing this was because he loved us, that he had asked his Son to do this in our place. And the interesting thing again, as we go on in the story, as we eventually get to Golgotha, as we eventually get to the place called the skull, it is here where something incredible happens. The professional, well-drilled soldiers of the Roman army came into contact with something that they had never experienced before. Jesus, the Son of God, God as a person, here lying before them, bruised, broken by their hand, a crown of thorns crushed onto his head, a sign being written in Aramaic and Latin to say, the King of the Jews. They were looking at this. They had crucified countless people, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, in this cruel way of ending and humiliating someone at the end of their life. And the centurion, whose job was simply to look at the cross, to make sure that everything was done in accordance with the law, that nothing would be held back. The 3 nails that were hammered into his feet and his wrists, hoisted upon a cross between 2 thieves, 2 robbers, One jeered and one reached out in hope. Remember me, Jesus, when you come into your kingdom. And there was this centurion, the guy in charge at the crucifixion scene, watching all of this. Piercing through the darkness, there comes a light where he cries out in the moments that Jesus breathes his last. He says, surely, without doubt, there can be no question that this is the Son of God. You know, people sadly die every day. People are dying because of this horrendous virus. And our hearts are breaking for families who are separated and cannot be with their loved ones at the time of grief. People in professionals see this, and they do so well in supporting families. But even like myself, sometimes a hardness can appear in our hearts as we look and as we think about what is happening before our very eyes. I've sat with countless people who have passed, who have died, and the emotion of the time. But you keep, in a sense, a professional focus. And occasionally something breaks through that your emotions can't be held back. You see, the thing about Good Friday isn't that someone died on a cross. It isn't even how someone died on a cross. Good Friday is all about who has died on a cross. And the Roman centurion, the man who had done this to Jesus, was the first to recognize truly on that day what was happening. Surely, without doubt, this man is the Son of God. Jesus' mother and the Marys and John, his closest friend, came, crept up and wept. How Mary's heart was pierced, remembering back to when it was said at the birth of Jesus, your heart will be pierced because of this man. It was pierced that day. And then, as it all begins to slow down, the pulse and the heartbeat of Jesus slows down, and the breath is shallow, but with one more breath, he cries out and he says, it is finished. It is accomplished. The darkest day, the day when the light of the world was extinguished, and yet a day of hope because of who it was that was on that cross. Friends, in the quietness, we think about the cross and who it was that was on the cross, dying for our sin, that we might know the peace of God, which passes all understanding.